like to take a moment to welcome everyone here and to call the meeting of Town Council into session. If you'll join me, let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You. All right, our first item of business is to approve the agenda, and we do have an addition to the consent agenda, and that is the appointment of Julie Osteen as Finance Director effective March 17th, 2025. Do we have any comments or any concerns about adding that to the consent agenda? If not, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
And a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, council comments. Well, I'd like to take a moment and thank the Mills River Farm Market for inviting us to breakfast on Saturday. It was really good. It's a great opportunity to see a lot of really good people that we haven't seen now in a couple of months. You know, Laura and I discovered the farm market several years ago now, and that's kind of the highlight of our weekend. We kind of plan our weekend around that, and you know, we made some really good friends, really good people. They are a 501c3 if anyone wants to make a donation to help them out. And a little donation will make a big difference there. They use a little bit of money in a lot of good ways. So anyway, I'd like to, again, thanks for a good breakfast. All right. Now, manager updates.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I do have a few updates for you here today. First off, I know that I'll start off actually. The amendment that you had added to the agenda was to announce Julie Osteen as our new Finance Director effective March 17th. And I want to thank Council for being willing to add that to the calendar to the agenda for us. I'm excited to announce again that Julie will be joining us. She comes to us from the city of Saluda as our Finance Director. She has many years of experience in finance and budget. And I think that she's going to be an asset to us in the town of Mills River as we continue to move along over the years to come. And so she's going to be here just as a little bit more information. She's going to be here part-time for the next couple of weeks starting March 17th. And then transitioning full-time after the first 2 weeks. And the reason why, as many of you know, we're in the middle of budget season, and it's not just the middle of budget season for ourselves, but it's the middle of budget season for all North Carolina municipalities and counties. And we want to make sure that we have a true smooth transition on both sides to make sure that she can come in here and hit the ground running with us, while also making sure that our friends down in Saluda also have an opportunity to make that transition appropriate for them as well. And so I'm very excited, like I said, to have her join us. The other item that I have is, I know it's on the front of people's minds as well, the cleanup that's going on here in the park. So we have finalized a lot of the work when it came to our site inspectors from FEMA coming in, helping us to understand and see where damages were and what those opportunities look like. We're also working right now finalizing an engineering firm to help us further understand what the actual true damages are to our property, to make sure that we don't, one, miss anything when we go to try to repair and mitigate those issues, but then also to ensure that when we're continuing to follow FEMA protocols so that we have the best chance of having as much of a reimbursement back onto the Mills River taxpayers as possible, right? Being good stewards of the financial dollar, we want to make sure that we follow everything to a T, to where we can, build back to where we were, and in some cases better, and at the same time be able to have access to those federal funds to make sure that those things happen in a timely manner. So there is work being done right now. It's a lot of it's behind the scenes, but we are continuing to move forward, and we hope to be able to have a bit more action over the weeks and months to come. From a planning perspective, I just want to mention that the North Carolina Department of Transportation, their long-range transportation plan, the STIP, also known as the State Transportation Improvement Program, right now is looking for public input around, again, around that program. You can find information on this public input survey or information portal via our website, via our social media pages as well. I highly recommend you go in there and provide your input for them. Specifically for Mills River, one of the items that is a part of the STIP is the widening of 191 out here. In the latest draft of the STIP, it pushes out that it delays that work by 3 years. So again, there's a lot of work going on within these programs. So again, I highly recommend that our public go and utilize those opportunities to provide their input. From a Parks and Recreation perspective, we have officially received the letter from the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources closing out our PARTIF grant. Again, that's the grant that helped the reimbursement partial funds for the property behind us, the expansion property, the $500,000. We're still waiting, and hopefully any day now we'll have that actually hit our coffers. So we're keeping an eye out for when that happens. But officially, we've received that letter. And just to put a couple of items on the public's list around upcoming events, Saturday, April 12th is going to be Mills River Earth Fest, and Saturday, May 3rd is Mills River Day. So two very exciting programs and events that will be coming up in Mills River. And that concludes my report.
Hey, thank you. All right, now we have a call for public comments. We have 3 people signed up. Mr. Lemkus, I understand you would like to go. I mean, you could go now if you'd like, or looks like you wanted to go later on, but whatever you would like. Okay. All right, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Brian Ross, 16 Schoolhouse Road. Nothing specific. Every year or so, I have to tell you guys that remind you that the public really appreciates you guys. I've said this word before. It is a thankless position sitting up there with the 5 of you. You got to put up with people like me. You got to put up with the people who care, and they don't always agree with you, but we really do appreciate it. Agree or not. I think Orly said it best to the planning board on her last day. It was like she's been there for all those years, and whether they agreed or not, everyone sat up here in the planning boards and the town council and all the boards, they were passionate and they cared about the town. So just want to remind that you guys, we know that, agree or disagree. Wasn't on the agenda, but Mr. McCarahan and Mr. Kimball and Mayor Gantz really appreciate that extra effort getting up early 2 Tuesdays ago and driving all the way to Raleigh, lobbying on our behalf, regardless of where we land on rural residential. You lobbied on our behalf for Session Law 57 to keep you 5 or the next 5 in a position to represent us locally. And then you drove 5 hours back, saw our planning board car sitting in the parking lot, came and sat through the rest of our meeting and then spoke to us and addressed us. And I really appreciate that extra effort. And would love to hear an update on that. Maybe other people too. Thank you all.
All right, this is Brady.
I'm Linda Britton, 100 Old Turnpike Road, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the Mills River Farm Market. And Jeff has already told you about our breakfast last Saturday. It was our annual vendor meeting. We have before the season starts to get the vendors together and talk about what's happening for the upcoming year. And it was a very exciting meeting, a lot of joy, and I felt like the people at our market are special because they're really excited to see each other after a few months apart. They can't wait to get back together again. Just a reminder, market opens on May the 3rd, which is the same as Mills River Day. We always open on the first Saturday in May, but Mills River Day doesn't start till 11? We start at 8. So come on down to the market, do your shopping, and then head on up to Mills River Day and have a lot of fun up there. But we're looking forward to a great season. We've got more applications than we've ever had before, I think, and we're gonna have to figure out how to shoehorn everybody in that wants to be with us. So we are still growing, and we were at a state conference a few weeks ago, and there are people all across the state that are talking about our market. So it's something to be proud of and something that you as a town should be happy to hear that we've got a good reputation across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Lucas.
Well, good evening. I'm Bert Lemkes, 134 Rolling Hills Road. I'm also the chairman of the Mills River Ag Advisory Committee. And that's really what I want to talk about. I got a letter here that I will hand to you later. I'll summarize that letter. Representing the members of the Mills River Ag Advisory Committee, we ask your consideration regarding the ongoing discussions drafting the floodplain ordinance for the town of Mills River. We recognize and appreciate the council's effort in ensuring the safety and sustainability of our community in light of flood risks. However, we strongly urge town council to maintain the agriculture exemption in the ordinance to protect the viability of agriculture in our town. Agriculture plays a critical role in the local economy and the character of Mills River. Many of our farmers and agriculture businesses are located in the floodplain area, and their operations are often essential to maintain open area, protecting water quality, and supporting local food production. The imposition of stringent regulations without consideration for agriculture could place undue burdens on these operations, potentially impacting local food security and harming the rural character of our town. We ask that the floodplain ordinance be crafted in a way that respects the unique needs of agricultural landowners, while still addressing the important concerns related to the floodplain management. The continuation of agriculture exemption would allow farmers to maintain necessary practices like cultivation, irrigation, drainage, and management of farm structures without unnecessary interference from floodplain-related regulations. Additionally, we encourage Town Council to continue the dialogue with the Agriculture Advisory Committee and other stakeholders to ensure that the ordinance is both effective and considerate of diverse land use in Mills River, particularly agriculture. Agricultural land in the floodplain needs to be protected. Thank you for your attention to this important matter. We are confident that with careful consideration, the town of Mills River can maintain its agricultural heritage while addressing floodplain concerns in a balanced and effective manner. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Now we have our consent agenda. Someone would like to make a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, regular agenda. Mr. McKiernan and Mr. Malachek, the floodplain regulatory options.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. I'm going to call Mike Malachek up here. He's going to be the one driving this discussion today, specifically around, as we've already heard about, the floodplain regulatory options. And so today, there's no necessarily any action that you must take today. There's no action that we're requesting from you. Really, it's providing this information for you. However, as Mr. Malachek will go over, is our options for you all to consider. And if you so choose that you would like to take action, you can. So again, he's going to give you that brief overview and then talk through also some stopgap measures that may also be available to council for consideration.
Thank you. Just enough time to get up here. So tonight is meant to be more of an open discussion. So feel free to interrupt me at any time during this presentation. The purpose is to outline basically the major components of a floodplain ordinance. And again, this is just based off of the model ordinance, based on the NFIP minimum requirements from FEMA. And again, taking those kind of big buckets of regulatory options and having an open discussion about the direction council would like to give staff in terms of regulatory options, policy considerations for drafting a potential floodplain ordinance for Mills River. The direction we have right now is basically from council to investigate a floodplain ordinance that does not meet minimum FEMA standards for NFIP participation. We also heard after we had the conversation with the town attorney at the last meeting that the town would like to wait until we get further clarification about the down zoning provision of the session law before adopting, because there's still some potential legal conflict there. And there was council consensus, I believe, at the last meeting to dig into fill limits specifically in the floodplain areas or special flood hazard areas. So these are the major components of a floodplain ordinance. What areas we want to regulate. Again, special flood hazard area, you'll hear me say that over and over. That's the 100-year floodplain and the floodway together. We'll talk about limits on specific land uses in floodplain areas, fill, land development limits, how we want to treat structures in special flood hazard areas, if we want to do floodplain development permits through the planning department, if we'd like to entertain variances through the Board of Adjustment, exemptions from the ordinance, and then if we'd like to entertain enforcement or floodplain complaints, again, through the planning department. So again, what areas do we want to regulate? So again, the special flood hazard area specifically includes the floodway and then the 100-year floodplain. So again, we've seen this diagram before, but that includes the stream channel. The floodway is the area of regular flood inundation, and then the 100-year floodplain is the area with the 1% annual chance of that flood event. Before I go forward, is there consensus that we want to regulate the special flood hazard area? Do we want to look at the 500-year floodplain at all? So looking for, I guess, feedback slide by slide as we go through.
Thinking.
Mhm. Great. So let's talk about specific land uses, because again, in the ordinance, we can write what land uses are allowed, which ones are allowed with standards, and which ones are just outright prohibited. So here's just a simple list. We have agriculture and bona fide farm uses, non-residential uses broken down into commercial and industrial, and then residential broken down into what we normally see, one-off single-family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, and also residential accessory structures like a shed or a storage building. Is there any specific feeling on which of those uses should or should not be allowed in those areas?
I think agricultural's a good fit in there, and I think they're good stewards to the floodplain.
I'm not interested in commercial or industrial in the floodplain. And multifamily dwellings, accessory structures, maybe, depending on what that looks like.
For single family dwellings, would that allow them or prohibit?
As far as commercial, the only thing I could really see is like someone had a TV business. That's not. Got bugs. Probably not going to be a lot of them. They should, any building that's there permanently should be flood stats. So that it doesn't cause fires, doesn't cause damage. If they have a trailer, I think it's Zen tubing on the side of Rich Broad on the way to Asheville. They got washed away.
You might need to consider that if it's a business, it's gonna need a parking lot and storage.
So anything like that would have to be standards, but maybe that's something would have to be allowed in professionals. Something would require a lot of it. Is that reasonable? Conditional zoning. That
Okay, so just to summarize, to make sure I'm not missing anything, so I've heard a general consensus to allow agriculture and floodplain and general residential accessory structures, no non-residential, no multifamily, and no dwellings, but possibly have special permit procedures for non-residential businesses related to the waterway.
Does that make sense?
I was thinking like accessory structures that were ag related,
Ah, okay.
like a spray shed.
Right. I had a question on this part too. Would this be an area that would be a good place to put the DOT when they're working on roads?
Can you elaborate on that?
Where they need to do bridges and
Mm.
stuff in the floodplain or widen
Mhm.
or anything? Would this be a good place to tuck them in?
Yeah, so we can make a note, basically for governmental land uses, providing an essential government service that those types of uses could be allowed. And then that's covered, I think, in the next slide, for Phil as well.
Okay.
So if we as a town decide we want to build something in the floodplain, we're covered. If it's like a recreational structure.
Would utilities be wrapped into that also, or do they need to be named specifically?
What was that, with what?
Utilities,
Mm.
electric,
Mhm.
water, sewer, if it's there, you know, if anything needs to be changed.
Mhm.
I'm gonna disagree with that. I don't think the DOT needs to fill in a road. They should make it a no-rise road and the town. I mean, water doesn't have a political affiliation.
This wasn't meant to be political. It was meant to get the roads fixed.
I know, but I'm saying if there's a way, let's say the Hooper Lane Bridge needs to get replaced. If there's a way to put it up on stilts and rise it to where it doesn't affect that, like there's a no rise with it, then I'd rather them have to do that than just raise Hooper Lane because they're allowed to. Because then they're filling in the floodplain.
I see
It would
what
be
you're
the
saying.
same with here. I mean, we're sitting in a raised building. Oh. That makes sense? I was just being cute with the political affiliation.
I didn't get it.
But you're right, water. You would have to go through all the flow studies and certifications, either a low rise or a low line, flow line.
Like, you know what I'm saying about Hooper Lane? Like, if it was written into, if we adopted something like this and it was DOT had a free pass to update Hooper Lane and they decided, well, let's go raise it 5 more feet so it's out of the floodplain. I mean, I don't know that that's a good idea.
It's gonna change.
Yeah,
Water's going so.
because they're going to push it elsewhere just for the spirit of putting in a taller road.
I think on previous discussions, they had said that, the DOT doesn't do great big rises, but if we did a no fill, then they couldn't work on the roads. So I was thinking about the roads up there on, Ray Hill and Banner Farm, right through there. And no, you wouldn't want a bridge that was raised way up through there.
If I may, the next slide is going to be talking about Phil in particular, but for the purpose of the slide that we're currently on, it's first setting that stage of what is, from your perspectives, since that's me, apparently, permitted versus not permitted. That's really the general question here. And then when we get past the permitted versus not permitted, then the next question is going to be, you know, what's going to be allowed within those permitted uses, right? And so for help me understand a little bit, it sounds like there is the potential for some need to permit. I'm just going to say, let's just say for the DOT purposes right now, there may be a need to permit, but the types of permit would need a certain major restrictions that you as council may want to see in order for it to be permitted, right? So I just want to make sure we're understanding the two elements that we're looking at right now. If we're saying we don't wish to permit those items, then there is no, you know, that's hard stop, done, right? And Mr. Malachek, you can correct me on that, but I think that's the general direction we're trying to get to now.
No,
And then
that's-
from that, we'll go to the fill.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, so again, I've got allow ag and floodplain, allow accessory structures, no non-residential, no multifamily or dwellings. And then again, possibly special provisions for non-residential businesses related to waterways. And then again, we'll look into governmental entities and utilities with the potential of possible, special provisions for those as well. Again, we don't, the goal of tonight is just to provide general direction so I can come back with a draft of something for y'all to react to. And then we can dive into the weeds on some of these issues at a later meeting.
This, I'm sorry to interrupt, but would planning board be working on this also?
Not at this time. So I mean, that would be at the will of council. Right now, staff's goal is to basically get clearer policy direction from y'all about what to draft up. If by all means, if you want the planning board to look at an ordinance or a draft ordinance and help craft it, that's fine. You can either do that informally or through a formal text amendment process. But again, knowing that we can go through the text amendment process, but probably won't want to adopt it till we have clarification on the downzoning provision in that session law. So let's talk about fill for a little bit. So should fill be allowed, for what purposes and how much? So I just threw up a couple of uses here: agricultural uses and development regarding fill, non-residential and residential. And then limits on fill are typically a percentage of the special flood hazard area on a particular property. So common limits are 10 to 20%. In the draft ordinance I had written, I think I started at the 10% level. So again, if you're looking at a 30-acre property and, in 30 acres in the floodplain area, 3 acres of that could be filled under a 10% provision.
A question on that. What if you own a 30-acre parcel and 15 of it's in the floodplain, but 15 of it's upland? Is that like something that would need to be discussed, whether it's 10% of the 100-year or 10% of the total parcel?
It's the special flood hazard area. So it'd be the 100-year floodplain and floodway. Or that's how they're traditionally calculated in these model ordinances.
Okay.
If we want to look at another method to regulate, we can do that too.
It had 30 acres. Half of it was in the floodplain. You could only fill 1.5.
Correct.
Okay, that was my question.
Yep.
Was you can go grab land elsewhere, put it all under one parcel and.
Now, it would just be and again, this is just what the model ordinance has. It would just be a percentage of the land in the flood hazard areas.
Mm-hmm.
One question I would like to hear from the agricultural advisory committee, or want to speak on this is, fill. We exempt agriculture. Sometimes they got to build a field a little bit. Sometimes they got to do things. And we wouldn't want to restrict their ability to maintain the field that they need. What will make that work today? How could we word this in a way that's
And I think to take it a step further on what Jeff's saying is there's always bad actors in a crowd. So what I don't want is someone to say it's agriculture use and they fill it up a foot one year, the next year they fill it up another foot, next year they fill it another foot. And then after 5 years,
not
it's not in the floodplain anymore, and then they sell it and it's commercial. So I don't want bad actors, because what's going to happen when that happens is the public's going to come back in and then they're going to take an unfair advantage on the people who are treating it right. So I think we need to protect that side.
well, typically we tell you what we'll do. Could it wait till some? I really want to hear from you. Give me both. I really want to hear your input. I really do. And we will comment on this before we move on. So, but keep it flowing if you don't mind, and you may have other questions you want to ask, and then that would be the time to do that. And that goes for anyone else. This is such an important item that, we really want to get input as we're crafting this, as we're moving forward. And just anything that would help. Yes, sir.
Yeah. The one thing I would just request for council, if since we have opened up for the public comment section for people to sign up on an item, if council's will is to have people speak, I would just ask that then at some point when they come, either before they come up or after they come up, that they go and sign the form so that we can have a document, and the names documented. Thank you.
And is that general consensus up here that we'll be going here? Some additional comment on this. So here's the form. I'll tell you what, I'll set it over here on, pass it down.
So, moving on to the other uses, do we want to allow any fill for non-residential or residential? Or I guess since we've talked about those uses just not being permitted, would we potentially not allow fill for those at all?
One thing that kind of piggybacks maybe on this is, what if I buy a piece of property, access to the DOT roads through the floodplain? So I can build a residential development on the non-floodplain. We want to be careful about building the driveway to it. Make sense? That 30-acre property, 15 acres of it's in the floodplain. Also, the way we get to the road, or the way we could get to the road, is through the floodplain. If we want building our main road through it, even if we don't raise it up. Not that anyone. Okay, I probably didn't know.
I think there's gonna be a lot of those situations in this, and probably the best way to handle those is by conditional zoning. Is maybe allow, and then that way you can look at it and say, well, you have other ways into your property. It's probably a case by case basis.
If council so wishes to opine on this as well. Okay. So the one thing to think about is, even if, let's just say, for general purposes, you said we do not wish to permit them. There is, in this discussion, the opportunity to say, hey, there may be an opportunity to permit this, but again, the fill restrictions are gonna be so restrictive that it has to be under very specific circumstances in order for that permit to actually go forward. So, again, that leeway that maybe, and I'm not, counseling one way or the other, but merely just to think through what the potential uses may be, where do we actually need to create a permitted use, but very restrictive under certain expectations moving forward, or to your point, conditional zoning or conditional request, et cetera.
And so that's just one point I wrote down, the possibility of residential roads through floodplain areas and possibly through a special approval process. The example I can think of is folks crossing Boylston Creek.
If they had to build a road through the floodplain down there and build it up, would it be feasible to have like culverts or some way that water could channel through there without destruction?
Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't be blocking, because any floodplain area is going to be a constantly flowing perennial stream. So you're, under Army Corps rules, DEQ rules, you're never supposed to basically dam a stream or block that up.
Right.
But we can include,
Even the road itself, it has to be built and it has to be raised up a little bit. Water that doesn't cause a rise.
A dam situation.
Yeah, and John, hesitant to say never do this, because we want to always leave the opportunity open if it's done properly with buildings. So, yeah, I agree, some sort of special thing, special use. As long as it's got plenty of oversight, make sure it's just not the.
So I've heard the access, we're talking about the access residential roads for residential properties. Any discussion on fill for non-residential development?
I'd like to keep fill down as much as possible.
I mean, we already talked about, possibly not allowing any non-residential in the floodplain. So if we were sticking with that line of thinking, again, at council's will, have no fill for non-residential uses.
Yeah, and that would differ from residential because they have this property that want to build a house on. So,
The commercial could have more impact on the system. Commercial standard is gonna be much wider than the residential emphasis.
that's right, and they're not going to be blocked by 2%. And we call it the 100-year floodplain, it's really 2%. So 2% of the time, it's going to be underwater. And, what are those odds? Is that you want to build commercial business where the 2% chance. But
All right, so I've got no fill for non-residential. Last thing I wanted to hit on residential. Again, we talked earlier about no dwellings in floodplain areas, so I just wanted to pull that down. No fill for dwellings then as well, is that correct? Like we wouldn't want to permit fill so someone puts a house in a floodplain area, correct? Okay. This is just an example of the draft ordinance I had written up. Again, this talks about starting at a maximum of 10% of fill of the special flood hazard area allowed. And again, this is just up for an example. Basically, agricultural development, redevelopment was allowed to do that. Public and governmental development, but fill prohibited for new residential or non-residential development. But any further discussion on the percentage limit? 10% was the lower number I picked out of the range, but just wondered if there were other feelings about that, or if staff should bring back, some examples of what that might look like for different property sizes for y'all to react to.
say that agricultural is out of there because we're not even on that type of stuff. I don't know, that's where I'd like to hear from our experts. Is it reasonable to say that you're not gonna be putting more than 10% of the land? Is that reasonable? Do we want to take that out? Say, there's this agriculture is gonna be exempted, it's not even mentioned agricultural.
And that's a possibility. There is a later slide just for blanket exemptions, and that, agricultural uses is one of those up for consideration. So if it was a blanket exemption from the ordinance, we wouldn't even need to address it. Or you can tailor it with specific regulations for it.
We want to avoid situation where a big part of the field washes away and not be able to go back in and bring it back up to where it was. So I don't think anyone's wanted to raise their fields up by the many. These fields back there without going through a whole lot of.
But I think that would be allowed because you're not filling, you're putting it back to grade.
That
Unless
was
I'm thinking of that wrong.
That was a question I had with the 10% fill. If the flood came through there and washed a hole out, they would be able to fill it back up to where it was. And then the most they could go would be the 10% above that.
Yeah, I mean, there's the opportunity for variances too. So, I mean, if an agricultural property owner, let's say, after Helene lost a big chunk of their field and the 10% or whatever, what was possibly adopted in the ordinance wasn't going to meet their needs, That's why variances, I think, are important, because you provide that outlet for those special circumstantial, situations for some relief from the ordinance. Now, we probably want to put limits on how much you can vary from that, so you don't have, to Councilman Kimball's example, someone coming in asking to go up to 50%. But that's a method to address that for those special circumstances.
Okay.
As long as they go back to what's there, then I'll. As long as they go back to what's there, I wouldn't look back to have to go through some sort of exemption or special use, because then we've got, unless we want our boards to be on call, so that they and advertise our meetings such that would practically do that. Anyway, that makes sense. I want to make sure that farmers are able to go back to it.
Mr. Malachek, I don't know if you're going to be going over this a little bit later as well, but the conversation about staff resources when it comes to monitoring fill, what is getting it back to versus going over the 10%, that kind of piece, I think is also helpful for this conversation because, so I'll turn it over to you to provide context.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on that, I mean, obviously, the more regulations, the more staff's going to need to work on enforcement. My concern when we were looking at the full NFIP compliant ordinance is that if we were regulating agriculture, obviously being an agricultural community, there'd be so many permits that possibly could put a burden on the department in terms of current resources and staff time. But again, if agriculture is exempt and we're not processing those permits, that's a different story. Usually in permitting, we rely on the applicant, to prove either through professional plan drawn up or an engineer certification that they're meeting the requirement. And depending upon the size of the development or the specific case, sometimes we'll have our contracted engineer check that. But yeah, I can touch on that more if anyone has questions about it. So land development or disturbance. So if you remember when we had the state NFIP folks here, development in a floodplain was as simple as moving dirt. So do we want to regulate land development or disturbance in special flood hazard areas? And so my example here was, what if I'm regrading land in a floodplain? Or there was the example that, soil was lost due to a storm, a flood event. And, I needed to add some back in, or sorry, opposite example, fill or soil was deposited from a flood event and I needed to remove it or grade it. Is there any interest in regulating land disturbance specifically? Now, we've already talked about no non-residential, no multifamily, so we don't need to cover that again, because those would just be blanket prohibitions. But for what we're looking at allowing, ag, accessory structures, special permits for non-residential businesses related to the waterway and governmental entities and utilities, do we want to get into regulating this?
My only fear, and I always look at things from the other side, is if we don't have some sort of something in there, is what prevents somebody from going in and clear cutting a bunch of trees and saying that that's just land development, I can do it. I mean, that's my only fear. So I don't know how you handle the two, but that's for you to figure out.
Yeah, that would, vegetation management, I think, would be different, but that's a valid question. This was more, again, looking at the model ordinance that had provisions for this in it. But again, if there's no feeling or that we have a need for that now, this is something we can, put a question mark on and always come to later.
My concern in that would be the sponge, and the sponge has taken hundreds of thousands of years to build up to what it is in a lot of these places. And if you go in and grade it and scrape it off, it's gone. And then you've lost the water absorption in that area until it develops back, however long that's going to take. ditches need to be cleaned and maintained. I mean, that's just a pretty much a thing. What when Mike described that, what I thought of is somebody going in there and, scraping a field out and cleaning it out, just grading. I mean, there's a difference between discing and grading.
So I can put something like that for discussion, in the draft ordinance, potentially looking at, again, grading or soil removal activities not related to agriculture.
Would you have to consider somebody digging a hole and burying stuff and putting dirt back over it? That would be a grading project that somebody could do that wouldn't be desired.
Mhm.
With, say, the land. Especially burying concrete free. So,
Mhm. In landfill or waste management sites, that would fall under non-residential uses. So if we're gonna have those as prohibited as a blanket prohibition, that could be addressed there. But I'll leave this for, possibly incorporating it in and talking about it a little more, because I do think that's a valid point. All right, structures. So we touched a little bit on this when we talked about the land uses, but what types of structures should we allow or not allow in floodplains? When we had the state NFIP folks out, obviously, with the model ordinance, there's elevation requirements, there's floodproofing requirements. Elevation is based on what I have up here, BFE, which is base flood elevation. So how high they estimate the 100-year flood to be, plus freeboard, which is an extra elevation number. 2 foot of freeboard, I think, is the regular number. So basically, if we went with the model ordinance, again, per NFIP standards, we would be looking at elevating structures above that base flood for protection. But if our goal is to only allow, certain and limited land uses in the floodplain, this may be unnecessary, but I still wanted to bring it up for discussion. But it is one of those major buckets for floodplain ordinances.
you have well, the businesses, commercial in the flood. And if they have to be damaged by the flood, we want them to. I have a problem telling someone who's got their house there, can't go back and build the house there. So, and even if they're able to salvage the house, should they have to raise the house to keep up the flood? And typically, I think I heard Fletcher is asking for freeboard treating. That means wherever that elevation is for the floodplain, you got to go 3 feet above that. So let's say my house is there and it does get flooded, but I'm able to salvage everything. We as a town won't make me raise my house 3 feet. Maybe if it's an insurance thing, I've got my own insurance, maybe it's not common. How about that?
Well, I was gonna say, is that an insurance thing, not necessarily a town thing?
Say insurance thing or mortgage holder.
But for the existing dwellings, that are there, they get damaged and salvage it.
And that is a point I was going to address, because fourth bullet down, substantial damage or substantial improvement. Again, those are terms in the model ordinance that basically, if your structure is damaged beyond 50% of its market value, then you have to improve it, again, per the model ordinance, to those specific elevation requirements. Same with the substantial improvement. Let's say you had a 400 square foot little cabin in the floodplain, and you kept adding onto it, and now it's 4 times the size it was originally. At what point, and again, the ordinance, I think, goes off 50%, at what point do you want to require the whole structure to be upgraded to protect it and, the lives of the folks living there?
So realize that 50% includes cost of So if you've got a building that's worth $10,000, it's leased and someone goes in and it's $30,000 worth of stuff that's damaged. The flood, the building may be fine, the $10,000 building, but the $30,000 worth of stuff in it is damaged. To replace that stuff now is a substantial.
Another point of consideration for this topic is the third bullet there, talking about anchoring requirements. And there's and there could be a conversation about the base flood elevation and then the freeboard as well, is because, as you may remember, when the NFIP coordinator was here, was talking about being good stewards for those downstream as well. And so it's also that thought of, if there is a dwelling of some sort that's in the floodplain that floods, has substantial damage, that, again, propane tanks, even just, let's just say, the house, the dwelling itself going downstream can create further issues and damages downstream, uh, either in the town of Mills River or, further downstream than us. And so that's something to consider when discussing this, is because building back to like it was prior to does create then a liability and the risk for the next storm that comes through, or the next flooding event that happens, to then have that potential damage downstream. Not to say that you all need to, act on it or not, but it's just something to consider when looking at the ordinance.
Any thoughts on that specific?
I think pole sheds would be fine for agricultural to store equipment under. They're not gonna need a rise for that. And if they had livestock, they could put them in there. If it's gonna flood, they'd move them. So I don't see a problem with that.
I think Mayor Pro Tem Moore brings up a good point. What about existing dwellings? Because I think when staff went through and pulled all the data, I can't remember exactly, but I think we had over 100 dwellings in floodplain areas in the town. So if those are damaged, I mean, basically, do we want to not regulate them at all? And if it gets damaged, to let the individual property owner deal with insurance and figure that out on their own? Or do we want to have some provision in the regulations, again, requiring improvement or demolishing the structure if they're not able to meet that?
I think the easy thing to do is to maybe, I don't know how you would put this in a text, that's your responsibility, but some way of flood proofing. If they rebuild, yes, they got to anchor their propane tank, or they got to, things like the low hanging fruit that they can do to make improvements. I don't know that I have the stomach to tell somebody, hey, you're gonna have to move,
Is there support though for looking into, or at least in the draft ordinance, anchoring of propane tanks, and I mean, that's really one of the most important ones in terms of safety, because obviously those can float downstream and be a hazard.
Well,
Right,
Any type of fuel.
it's broken up, and propane gets broken up. It flows. It does. Propane goes out in here. The oil goes in the water.
right.
So maybe something like that as well.
And just for further clarification, we are still talking about for non-agricultural uses, because again, if it's an agricultural use propane tank, if ag is completely exempt, then those types of items would not be triggered by these types of provisions. However, if I just throw that out there because I do know that, again, from both commercial uses overall, there are commercial uses and agricultural uses for these types of tanks and other potential hazards that could go downstream.
I don't think it's that big of a burden to put a propane tank on concrete and bolt it down. I mean, whether it's agriculture or not, I don't think that's a huge burden. Yeah, or a diesel tank to be mounted to I don't think that's a huge ask, in my opinion.
Well, if there's no more discussion on that, let's move on to the next slide. Oh, this was just some examples of the substantial damage and improvement provisions in the draft ordinance. again, usually with those, it's a 50% threshold or over a number of years in terms of improvement or damage. This was just an example of elevation of buildings. And again, here's an example of tanks. So there's, again, specific provisions for underground tanks so that those tanks are flood proof. So like you're saying, the petroleum product doesn't leak out into the waters. And then above ground tanks could either be elevated or tanked. So what about permits? Obviously with some of these, if we are gonna regulate them, the best way to do that is through floodplain development permits. Is that something, council has a will, to write into the ordinance and, for us to get into? You know, we can, what I put up here is basically we can just restrict what's not allowed there and possibly have, you know, an administration enforcement section of the ordinance where if someone's doing something prohibited, staff can take action, stop it. But do we want to issue permits for what is allowed there? Obviously, you know, there's a slide coming up about blanket exemptions. So if something is blanket, you know, exempt, a permit would not come into play. We've talked about some special provisions for, you know, non-residential uses related to the waterways, but is there an appetite for doing permits for the allowed development types in these areas? Like residential accessory structures.
I don't think so, but I don't want to encourage development in the floodplain.
No, you got it.
Could be enforced out. Somebody goes and does something, but they starts building something. It's not allowed. We can certainly stop that.
Correct. So yeah, it would just be a different way of regulating. You know, if you think of zoning, there's so many different districts and different allowances. That's why we have the zoning permit, because there's so much to check. If we're gonna pare down our flood ordinance, not meet NFIP standards, but basically say these things are prohibited, this is exempt, and maybe one thing's allowed, there may not be a need for permits. But again, permitting is also important because it's a way to ensure compliance for what you do want to allow there.
So accessory structures, that we might allow. Non-agricultural. If it's permitted, then that gives you the heads up it's happening, the ability to track it and make sure it's in compliance. That's all reason.
Yeah, you know, I'll say this, even if it's for me, even if it's again, this goes back to the bad characters, even if it's an agriculture thing, even if it's a free permit, I don't think it's too much to ask to come down and fill out, have a sheet of paper that says, yeah, I'm working in this area. So that we know what's going on as a town, so that we don't get hit blindsided 6 months from the road or a year down the road. It's like, well, why didn't y'all regulate this? Well, we didn't know it was going on. So, but if we have some sort of way of it just bringing it to our attention that that's going on, then I think it's a lot easier to keep an eye on it and make sure we're getting what we want as an end product.
Structure like pole barn, something.
Go ahead, I was gonna bring that. Well, right now, you can build a pole shed on your property and you don't have to have a permit. But when you start putting electricity in it, that changes the game. Is that correct, Mike?
So for an agricultural structure.
Well, the agriculture is exempt for zoning permits, so we don't look at anything, but you're correct.
Even
Get electric inspected.
Correct. For agricultural
agricultural.
structures and uses.
But for my woodshed, if I go down there and hang a light in it to work while I'm working, that's fine. But if I wired electricity in there to where if I go down there and flip a switch and the light comes on, that should have had a permit. Or if you put siding on it, on all four sides.
Well, we can come back to this one, you know, I can look into, again, here's, example of what was in the NFIP ordinance. Again, this goes into much more detail, because again, it's much more stringent about having a site plan prepared by a professional, having the base flood elevation identified. So we can look through some example ordinances and maybe see you know, possible good middle ground for this for further discussion.
I have one hypothetical. So if we allow this permits, or we're gonna accept permits, would that a little bit open the door to, I can come get a permit and then I can go to the Board of Adjustment, looking at Bert because he does it, and say that there's a financial burden and still get what I want with a permit. But if we don't allow permits, then you can't even start project.
Yeah, so I mean, usually the variance process is gonna be related to some type of, I'm thinking of what we do now with zoning is related to some type of permit submission, because you want to do X, but you're not able to because of our code.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's two ways to do that. You can either have the permit while going into the variance request, or you can just go in with what your plan is. And then again, when Board of Adjustment approves variances, there's a formal order of approval that lays out all the conditions and restrictions of what's allowed. So the permit's not always necessary at the front end, because there's that basically legal document or an order from the board saying what you can and cannot do. So there's a choice there. I don't know if I answered your question.
Sort of.
Let me ask a
Yeah.
question. Okay, so if you had a permit, could somebody come in and challenge it to somehow work it into a dwelling or a structure that we wouldn't want?
They wouldn't be able to challenge it, but that doesn't mean they can't do something without our knowledge.
Right.
So, so I'd written down possibly allowing them for non-ag uses. So again, going back to the residential accessory structure, there are situations we've dealt with in our department where we approve a shed with electricity, and then we go and inspect it, and there's a bathroom in there, and maybe it's been converted into an Airbnb without us knowing it. So that type of issue we would want to prevent in those floodplains, because again, hearing earlier that we don't want to allow more dwellings there. We don't want folks living permanently in those areas because of the hazard. So that's where permits may come into play for those specific uses or structures council may want to allow to tighten it up and have that documentation, as Councilman Kimball mentioned.
Okay. Thank you.
So we talked about variances, or I touched on it briefly. My recommendation would be to allow a variance procedure, but again, that's up to council's discretion. There's also specific rules or restrictions we could put on how much a variance, you know, what could be varied from in the ordinance. Is it just fill limits? Is it, you know, again, if we were doing elevation requirements, is it a variance from that? So is that something we think we want to allow? I think fill was the most important. And again, I'm just remembering the conversation from the City of Hendersonville meeting and when the state NFIP coordinator was here, you know, specifically about road utility projects, those necessary kind of governmental entity projects, that if there's a limit on fill and they're not able to complete that project, then, you know, there's potential citizens missing out on a benefit, even with the park back here. Because obviously there's floodplain area in the backfield here, and I think even in the master plan there was maybe going to be a picnic shelter or something back there. So do we want to allow variances from some of these provisions in the floodplain ordinance?
I'm okay with variances as long as there's a guideline on what we will and won't. The threshold, just because 30 years from now, I hope none of us are still here and nobody's going to remember the discussion of what our intent was. So if we put a barrier between it, they'll have some framework to work within.
And we've got draft language to work with. So again, in the model ordinance, the variance provisions talk about, only the minimum variance, or sorry, the maximum amount of fill or the minimum variance from the standard should be allowed. And again, the burden would be on the applicant to prove that, show good cause, show hardship, all of that. So similar to variances for zoning matters where there's specific hardship standards that have to be met in order for that variance to be approved. That's something we can build into here as well. Yes.
Well, I have to have this because the land's in the floodplain. Well, it's in the floodplain before.
So let's talk about blanket exemptions. So should the town grant exemptions for specific land uses? We've already talked about obviously not allowing non-residential, but what about for residential accessory structures, no dwellings involved? And obviously what about agriculture or bona fide farm uses? So this would, similar to the zoning ordinance, what I'm thinking here is this would basically be one of the sections at the top that basically says, this land use is exempt from all of the provisions of this ordinance. Now, if we want to tailor, we talked about, ag uses potentially wanting to regulate them via petroleum tanks or propane tanks or anchoring that. We could write in, and I'm just using this as an example, bona fide farms are exempt from all provisions of this ordinance except for petroleum tank anchoring. But again, just wanted to get a feel about which direction council feels we should go in terms of drafting an ordinance for this.
I'm not for blanket exemptions, and the reason why is because in my commercial business, anytime I have to pull a permit on anything in any jurisdiction, the first thing I go look for is blanket exemptions. And I figure out how to make my use fit under that blanket exemption so that I can get around the code. So I am not for blanket exemptions. No, I'll admit it. The rules are there, I can do it.
It would curb some bad apples, wouldn't it? You could, if there's not a blanket exemption, like if there's an ag exemption from fill, but not just a total blanket, then we could talk and see what would work to where ag is not affected, but somebody's not growing dirt in the back corner and I forgot about that, yes.
I was gonna ask, what if somebody has a dwelling and it has a garden, a big garden in the back? That would be considered farming, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
That would attach to a dwelling,
Yeah, so
So-
if they had a plot in the floodplain area,
right?
it would all be based on how we write the definition in the ordinance. But that's something, we can write in.
Haven't in the past, we sort of went with like Henderson County's, what they determine is ag?
I don't know. Right now, ours basically says, I think in the zoning ordinance, agriculture, and it lists, could be dairy, could be poultry raising, raising of any produce. It doesn't define the scale of it. But there are residences in town. I'll just say that we've had complaints about through the nuisance ordinance. This gets into another discussion where they do have agriculture on their property. Perhaps they're raising chickens for eggs, or perhaps they have a garden and they're putting manure in it and it might smell to a neighbor. Our interpretation has been that if it's an agricultural use, even on a private property, it's exempt from nuisance ordinances, and that's written in code. But it's all, it comes down to interpretation by staff, and to narrow that down, that's where the definitions are very important. So all I've heard so far is possibly ag, but not a blanket exemption.
We can bring.
Yeah.
We can bring examples back. This is providing us with the ability to create options for you all to react to later.
So what about floodplain enforcement? We have gotten complaints, not very many, but at the staff level, folks calling in saying, hey, you know, there's a bunch of dump trucks going into this property. I think it's in the floodplain. Are they allowed to do that? Unfortunately, right now, since we have no regulations and it's unregulated, there's not much we can do about it. But do we want an enforcement mechanism in the ordinance? And I'll say even specifically, do we want people to be able to file complaints for us to investigate as well?
I think that's a good thing. What you build up on one side, you push off on somebody else.
No,
No,
it's too much floodplain.
no, but with an
Um,
ordinance like that, everybody's gonna police it and let you know so you can go.
And that's what I was gonna say, similar to the nuisance ordinance, you know, we don't go out looking for junk vehicles on people's properties. It's always complaint driven. It's always when a citizen or taxpayer is being affected by something and reaches out to us. So if that's council's will, it can be similar for this as well. So that's kind of the end of me covering all the buckets. I did just want to touch, or I don't know if the main, okay, I did want to touch on potential moratoriums on development in special flood hazard areas, because I know there's been some interest in at least learning about this. So moratoriums are allowed. We can do moratoriums basically on any type of zoning permit, any type of permit approval through our department for a special flood hazard area. And then this is what state law sets out. So if we're doing a moratorium up to 60 days, council has to hold a public hearing and there has to be one notice in a newspaper up to a week before. If we do a longer moratorium, 61 days or longer, we have to follow the state statute notice requirements like we do for any rezoning, any land use matter. So that's where we have the 2 notices between 10 and 25 days before the date. Now, like we've talked about with the rural rezoning, if someone submitted a permit already and that permit's under review through permit choice state law, they can basically determine which rules they develop under. So again, they have that grandfathered status that if I've got an application in before a moratorium takes effect, I'm allowed to continue forward with that under the current rules.
And Mr. Malachek, also, I think it's helpful to share the what types of uses would be affected by a potential moratorium and which ones would not be covered under a moratorium.
That's correct. Yeah. So I thought I had that on the slide, but the state protects residential uses from moratoriums, period. So no moratorium adopted by any local government can prohibit the development of any residential use, including multifamily. So if council were to go down the path of a moratorium in special flood hazard areas, it would specifically be for non-residential development. Obviously, since there is no permit requirement for agriculture because of the zoning exemption, that wouldn't even come into play.
But what about a moratorium on fill?
It's unregulated right now, so it would be a moratorium on any permit process we have in the code on the books now. So variances, special use permits, zoning permits, just general development permits, again, that we issue currently. We can't do a moratorium on a permit process that may not exist yet. But we can pause everything that we do now, except for residential, to get time to put something like, you know, those provisions in place.
If we was to do that, would it affect any of the recovery from the storm near the river banks?
I don't
or
believe so,
creeks?
because there's no permits they need from our office regarding that. And usually, you know, specifically if it's the Army Corps coming down the Mills River cleaning it, there's special rules or relaxed rules that they basically abide by after disasters. And since it's federally run,
Mhm.
their folks would be making sure, you know, they abide by those. Nothing would come through us.
Moratorium considered downside.
No. But we can ask our attorney.
But we can't do a moratorium, make sure I understand, it's still in the floodplain because we don't have a procedure or permit that allows.
Correct.
It just happens. So we can't put that as.
Because it's
Because we do have, zoning for building. For Wayne County residential, but for commercial, we could do a moratorium on commercial development.
correct. It's not, because it's a temporary pause on development approvals. It's not us going into the ordinance itself and saying you can't do this anymore, or you are only allowed to develop at a lower density, or any of those other provisions. Correct.
But how is, I don't, I'm not following how we can't put a moratorium on fill when we don't have a fill ordinance, so we can start at 0.
So the way I understand it, and the manager can chime in, is that we can only put a moratorium on current development approvals. So if there is no development approval, there's nothing we review in our office for fill, just because it's not in the code. So there is no permit approval process for us to pause, basically. It's unregulated. It's basically a free market on placing fill in the floodplain. Now we can pause everything else to put rules in place to address that. But because there's no permit process, there's nothing to stop the development.
So,
You know,
can't do it tonight. But if we walked down here tonight, with an ordinance that said, no building in the floodplain. That's not a down zone, we're not creating a non-conformity, because what's in the floodplain is what's in the floodplain. What's not in the floodplain is not in the floodplain. The ordinance doesn't change that. It just says you can't put more dirt in the flood.
But we're not talking about moratoriums in this
Now, it's
situation.
not more.
Yeah.
Got that.
Hmm.
That's not a down zoning because we're not creating a non-conformity, because we're not, the dirt that's there is there now.
It may not be it may not be a it does. It may not be a non-conformity, but you're regulating something that wasn't regulated before. So technically, right now, if I own property on Mills River, I can fill. It's my right to, because it's unregulated. And so by putting an ordinance in place, just saying no fill, or no fill for these specific types of development, my development potential's now been limited. So in my opinion, and we would need to check with the attorney, it would not be allowed under the down zoning rule.
So, and the reason I'm getting at that is, what if we just did a very basic no-fill ordinance?
I think it goes back to what the town attorney said just regarding floodplain regulations in general, that there is a possibility, there's legal liability for the town, because we're just not clear enough on which parts of that session law are triggered by that.
Yes, and I would just go a little bit further and just say it really is up to the will of council on whether or not, going that route. The direction that, or the consensus that I felt at the last meeting with our town attorney was that there was not a desire from council as a whole to open ourselves up to that type of liability. However, there's the potential there, but there are, again, potential risks associated with it, because there is so much ambiguity around what this law touches and what it may trigger, as Mr. Malachek said.
And the local bill may allow us to regulate floodplain or something, that may call it out.
Well,
if we're gonna look at it.
it depends on the local bill in which we're talking, and depending on, again, how it works through that process.
So we're doing our homework now. We're setting ourselves up with what when we get better guidance on the local bit on how we're gonna get affected by the state's bill.
so we couldn't have really entered into the NFIP anyway, because that would have been a down zone.
I think the argument was that it's a federal regulation. So federal government rules.
Yes, that was the consideration. And again, we're playing in an area that's untested a little bit, but yes, that was the idea, because it is a federal regulation that it would therefore be able to be enacted.
So just going a little in more depth with moratoriums, there are very specific requirements when adopting one. These are statements that would have to be in council's ordinance imposing the moratorium. And basically, it's just protecting individuals that it's not being done, capriciously or in an arbitrary manner. So, a statement of the problems and conditions necessitating the moratorium, and what the town tried to do before imposing a moratorium that wasn't able to achieve the goal, the specific development approval subject to it, and it has to have that was very clear, it has to have a specific date of termination, because that also determines whether you're in that 60-day or 61-day notice requirement. And then again, we kind of have to outline basically a schedule for the actions we're going to take during that moratorium period to try to address the problem. So you really got to prove to the state, to the public, that we're not just doing this willy-nilly. We're doing this with a specific plan in place to address a specific problem or specific permits within a specific time. There are limits on moratorium renewals and extensions. So again, we basically have to show, I kind of touched on this, that we've made every reasonable effort to correct the problem, quote unquote, within the moratorium period. And we really need to prove to the public and per state law that additional time is needed and possibly even additional actions are outlined during an extension. What are the new things we've discovered that warrant that we need more time to address that matter? And that's all I've got. Any other questions from council?
Good evening, thank you, Level State. Just had a comment, Tyler, about a question on the field. Is that limited to the partial or to the own? Could I fill 10%, sell it to my wife, her fill 10%, she sell it to our son, him fill 10%? Or will that be tied to a partial? Or would he fill 10%? Well,
And I heard you.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, for 10%, this spread wouldn't be as much because the property is 10% smaller.
Smaller, but it would still, you can keep doing that.
You could still fill it up.
You can still fill it up. But that's just something I want y'all, we can look into, because there's rumor that Parsons and Fletcher that it happened. Sold it to themselves that, and are just keep fulfilling. And one thing, if you like, second you all can, please pass.
Would anyone else like to speak? Oh, and, if you would, please sign it up there. I forgot to ask you to do that. Is that wrong if I do? Or, I'll sign it. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for, I think it's brought up very important for agriculture. Yeah, with a great sense of urgency when there is a major event happening. Any delay we want to prevent. Two, it can be filled for restoration of washout. It can be removal of inputs of drain. I think the most important part that the Ag Committee would like you to consider again is in the founding documents of the town is an exemption, general exemption for agriculture as much as possible. I understand that we want to prevent these little sidetracks whereby you fill every year the food. That's not intended, obviously, but to keep agriculture exempt, period.
Mind if I ask you a question? I don't want to put you on the spot, but just, what about people having, you may park equipment, because the floodplains, sometimes you park the tractor where it's used. And you may have a pole shed, you may have things that need there to maintain the tractor, like a fuel tank. Fixed fuel tanks, portable fuel tanks, you buy your diesel in bulk. Would it be reasonable to have that fuel tank that's there made floodproof? Would it be reasonable when one of our propane providers comes in to set propane tank? Is it a huge burden to have it go ahead and anchor the tank? Because it's going to be, we're going to lose the tank too. If
You
it goes.
consider farmers, generally speaking, they go on to see their fuel floating away in a river.
It's an expensive job.
So
Same thing with Aviax. They're true.
there's always gonna be some kind of an exception where you say, hey, you should have done this, you should have done that. But I think in general, we're asking for an exemption for agriculture use. And one other remark, agriculture is not backyard garden. There are state-specific rules, what is considered agriculture, where you can get a sales tax exemption. I think it's $10,000 worth of sales a year. You gotta show that over so many years that there are state regulations, what is considered agriculture.
Probably you guys don't count this year.
So, but we don't regulate that now, right? We don't follow those standards.
Those definitions are not in our code. That's actually a recommendation I have when we draft the UDO, is to follow the state statutes 160D 903, specifically for modified farm uses. But right now, agriculture as it's defined, again, the zoning ordinance as an example, just says, that any dairy livestock, any poultry, anything.
So would the ag committee be okay if we change the exemption to include that?
Agriculture means we consider
Agriculture as
ourselves
defined.
agriculture according the rules of North Carolina State.
Okay.
Would there need to be any provisions for sprays and fertilize and
Well,
stuff?
We have over the years seen in the floodplain where spray sheds, we call are built, and they are elevated above the floodplain
Mhm.
to prevent potential damage with, chemicals. There's a couple of them in.
Thank you. Thanks for your time on this. Sure. You're welcome, Mr. Rice.
I got it. Awesome. You got it. Thank you. So I know you guys have talked about a lot. I may have missed this, so Michael can correct. As Mr. Kimball said, the intent of these conversations, there's no doubt a long time ago, the intent was to protect good neighbors. I told Mr. Lynn, Mr. Cantrell, and our neighbors over at Ohio that they are good neighbors. Not everyone's going to be good neighbors. I think there's just a blanket concerned about a few little things here and there, but a major thing, and again, this is that I'm asking this for clarification. Ag isn't just corn in the ground. If I'm not mistaken, Flavor First falls under. Packing houses fall under ag. Greenhouses, large buildings. The development, the word ag use, I believe, ag use and ag development were on a couple of slides. What's ag development in the flood? Are they going to be able to fill in for a 10,000, 100,000 square foot building, or not fill and have it not flood compliant? What are those structures? Again, it's not these neighbors. It's the one that you mentioned, or the 5 that we don't know about. That's my question. What about that, the ag development part?
Very good question. Yes,
I don't know if this is relevant to the definition of agriculture or not. Because I know there is a state definition, because you have to bring in a certain amount of income in order to have that tax exempt number, so that you don't have to to pay the sales tax on various farm products and whatnot. But there's a lot of producers in our area that don't fall under that definition of agriculture, but they are contributing to the agriculture in this area. Because when I look at the people that sell at our local farmers market, I mean, we put how much money into the economy last year, roughly? $140,000 into our local economy. And I don't know, there's probably just a handful in there that actually would fall under that definition of agriculture because of the amount of money that you have to make per year in order to get that designation. But they are still actively participating in agriculture and contributing to the agriculture aspect of this community. So I don't know, that has probably nothing to do with this concept that we're talking about here, but I felt like that needed to be added to the conversation.
That's good. You're correct, because we wanna, if we limit the definition of agriculture such that we exclude our small farmers that come to the farmers market. The good thing, I think, is that they're probably not going to be having a substantial amount of property to fill with what, but let's keep that in mind. Let's definitely keep that in and explore that and avoid unwelcome, unintentional costs.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, I just wanted to follow up briefly on Mr. Malachek's ending there. Is it my understanding then from council that we will continue to take these into account and then in the future meeting bring forward a potential floodplain ordinance for you all for consideration? Is there any will of council as well around the moratorium discussion? Is it at a potential future meeting, come back to that conversation? Or is there will of council to direct us to move towards that type of moratorium? That there's some action that has to be taken for that?
I'm not sure a moratorium is gonna do us any good. Not sure what we can put a moratorium on. Commercial development would have to go through a process that we could regulate. I'm not sure what's will of council we will. Are we gonna get anything out of the moratorium? Potential.
No, but I sort of hate to like keep just being like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Well, let's wait for somebody else to make a decision. I mean, that's where I'm at.
Moratorium would have to be on commercial development. Because that's really the only thing that we could,
Yes.
what's the verb for that? Moratorium is now. I want to say, what's the verb? What can we moratorium?
Well, yeah, there would be well, and again,
Just put it,
well,
leave it as a noun, okay.
I think there is a chance of commercial development that we do not want. And I think we should, as long as Mike doesn't say it's like a phenomenal amount of staff time. I think it's worth looking into quickly. And I mean, maybe not for a year, but something to where we could say, all right, let's chill, and see where
Because
the rest of this lands.
But hopefully within 180 days, we'll have.
so, and just a reminder for council, there are two trigger points for this. There's a moratorium of up to 60 days. That's the quicker of the two options. So that would require holding a public hearing and having one notice in a newspaper at least 7 days before the hearing date, right? Where so, technically, we could meet that up to 60 days requirement for the next meeting. Okay, so actually having that public hearing scheduled for the next meeting. If that is not the will of council and it's and the desire is to over 61 days, it's going to be holding a public hearing, having two newspaper notices, and of which one is not less than 10 days nor more than 25 days before the hearing date. So it takes more time in order to do that. Again, both are legitimate options, and whatever option council would like to take, just one has a little bit, we could act a little bit quicker on that if it was if it was 60 days or less.
Sure. 60 days, it'll be enough for us to have,
Get us anything.
how we think. It would be a moratorium. Yes. Commercial development in the special flood hazard area. And include building. Commercial development,
I could support that.
I support that. Would it be a huge amount of staff time? Would it be? I mean, it's gotta be in the paper 10 days.
There wouldn't be an unreasonable burden on staff. We would be able to handle that. Again, if council wants to go that direction.
But we probably wouldn't have it to discuss next council, but
You would not be able to meet that.
would we want to have a special council meeting in 3 weeks? Or would we want to delay it till the next to the second council meeting a month from now? 4 weeks from now.
We're doing math over here real quick,
Sure.
just to check.
It's not gonna be as simple as sketching out an ad, getting it in the paper tomorrow. It's gonna take more thought than that. It's gonna take more time than that. So 4 weeks,
Yes.
is that reasonable?
I believe that that's reasonable. The one thing, we'll have to look at our schedules as well. I mean, if it's council's will, potentially the April 24th meeting, we make sure that staff is here. I think the April 10th meeting, there may be some conflicts there again that I think we may be able to move at the April 10th meeting, but if you have questions or concerns, I want to make sure that staff is available to answer those questions for you. So we can work through that, but it would have to be one of those 2 April meetings. Right. And I believe, like I said, I believe preferably 24th, but I can confirm that for council.
Reasonable?
No, I want it faster.
I believe state law gets in our way, unfortunately.
Yeah. Way
I can do a special meeting.
But as soon as we found it out, kind of wait 6 weeks.
So we can, if council so chooses, make it into next week's newspaper. And then we would have to then run it one more time. And then it would have, the meeting then would have to be, the public hearing would have to be between 10 and 25 days of that second newspaper notice. So again, the second one would be, if we hit the newspaper next week, I'm looking at our clerk just real quick.
So it's
Would
2
it be next?
newspaper notices,
Yes.
not 2 different newspapers.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Can't put it in this one and that one.
It has to run twice.
Has to run twice, okay.
Yes.
Can we do the quick 60-day one while we're working on the 61+ day one?
So not a lawyer, to be very clear. My understanding is that yes, you could. However, again, if you're going to extend it past the 60 days, you do have to meet those thresholds that Mr. Malachek was talking about, saying you've tried to, everything reasonable that you could make, and then if you could answer those questions, then yes, you could trigger that, and you would give yourself that time for the longer duration.
So we can't work on the 180-day while we have the 60-day in place.
Unless
That's not the intent.
hypothetically, we can answer those questions within that time period.
It's reasonable, not because we're restricted by state law. I don't know if that would apply or not. There's a reason. Yeah. is gonna have to be 180 day, and I think, are we all available for a special call meeting if necessary?
Yes.
So please, we've been in here a little over an hour and a half. Let's maybe want to move around a little bit. We want to take a 5 minute break. Ms. Christian, I know your report's gonna be great. I don't want to put you on the spot and have you thinking, I gotta hurry up, get out of here. I mean, if you did want to say every other word, it would take half as long. But, we want to hear your information, so, if we want to take a 5 minute break while we're discussing this,
Please.
please, okay. Okay. I don't think. Take a break. I'd like to call us back into session. I apologize that we had to wait a few minutes to get to the 5 minutes that we were recessed for. So, but here we are back, a little more than 5 minutes, but good to be back. So what was discussed is that we can make all of the advertising requirements moratorium if we April the 10th. So if we start
If-
now.
If you make a motion to set a public hearing on April the 10th.
So I
that-
make a motion to set a public hearing on April the 10th regards to a moratorium on floodplain.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you. Thanks, staff. Thank you for the hard work you've already put into this. Good work you're going to put in. All right. Now, we have our presentation of tax collector report. Ms. Rental.
Yes, so Ms. Rental's perspective now is to try to be less time than the last item. So I believe in you. I believe that you've got this.
Well, I am short, sweet, and to the point usually. So the collection percentage for February puts us at 98.24%. We collected just over $68,000. As you may remember from last meeting, we sent out letters for February 1st to remind people who had forgotten and had delinquent taxes. So we have started seeing more money come in there. We've, let's see, our collection percentage for February of 2023 was 97.79, so we're still ahead of the curve, which is great. We have a balance of almost 67,000 to collect by June. So still working with taxable payers and people who are calling in to work with us.
Excellent. Thank you. I do have a question. I don't want to put you on the spot,
Go ahead.
but where we go down to the tax year like 2014, 2015, is that money that's still out there that hasn't been collected yet?
We track 10 years worth of taxes.
Hmm.
I still, let's see, I think in 2023, we were collecting some going back to 2014, 2015. There's some people who have gotten caught up. There are other people who are outstanding since 2018 that I can think off the top of my head. So we do track every month how much we bring in. And you'll see at the bottom that this year we've collected $10,000 in past year's taxes.
Okay.
Because there are people who don't realize they've missed a year or things.
Wow. Thank you for the good work. Thanks for staying.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other business?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I actually do have one item for other business for consideration from council. At our budget retreat last week, there was a conversation around the property and the park expansion property and the potential for moving forward with an ag lease, or at least for part of that property. And when staff went back and looked at it, it's approximately 12 to 15 acres that's not currently within the lease that we have with Henderson County, and that we believe is potentially up for an ag lease back in that area. And the one thing I would just ask from this council is guidance on for guidance to staff on moving forward with that, if that's something that you also desire, and specifically, enough time for us to be able to put together a package that the farming community could bid on it if they so choose, including, certain restrictions that you all may wish to have. At the budget conversation, again, there were conversations about the types of potential crops such as, hay, barley, soybean, wheat, et cetera, just because, again, we're going to be working to, on that property potentially next year, getting the project scoping and stuff done. But any kind of guidance on that would be very helpful for us as staff, because we want to make sure that if that is your desire, that we don't miss the potential beginning of the growing season.
Where is the parcel at that is not being leased by Henderson County?
It's in the back. It's on the, it's in the, it's closest to the river. So it's beside the dairy, on the backside of the dairy farm, back to the river.
Okay.
Hmm.
Would, if we lease that, would it interfere with any kind of riverbank restoration or anything that the park would be interested down there on that end?
So it honestly depends on the type and time when it comes to any riverbank restoration. Right now, there's no planned riverbank restoration that we have, uh, that we've been able to identify that would be potentially affecting the next, 6 to 9 months, I would say. However, again, if there's a grant opportunity or something that comes up that we need to act on, then that's something that we would want, council to consider as a part of that. But again, depending on where the property line is compared to where the actual riverbank itself is, and I'm not a farmer, but I would just say that, there would be some buffer between the end of the acreage there to the actual riverbank itself.
And how would they access that property?
Yeah, so that would be something that we would have to look into, again, as a part of the scoping for this, is to be able to say, would it be via the maintenance road here or some other avenue? I don't have that answer at this moment.
And would it affect any future infrastructure such as roads or that are shown on the master plan for the park?
That's a great question, Mayor Pro Tem Moore, but I would say, again, this would be for, my recommendation would be that it would be for a very limited amount of time for the growing season, that's currently coming up again, probably, through, to the end of October, beginning of November, to that point, and the types of crops that would be amenable to that growing season. And so then if there were actions that needed to be, anything going into the next calendar year, that would free us up to be able to explore those options. Or again, depending on how far we're along with the project, to potentially say, hey, there'd be another growing season that we could have back there. There's a lot of unknown around the speed of that project, but I don't foresee anything within the next 9 months that would stop us from that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Even if somehow we got the money today to build all the roads, we couldn't do it before in the growing season. It's got to be designed. You know how engineers are. They take a while.
And, one of the first things, and again, we talked about during the budget retreat last week is, looking at the potential July 1st as a part of the budget, starting with infrastructure scoping of that entire property first, and having that as the first conversation, then being able to overlay potential roads, structures, et cetera.
It's council's pleasure.
Somebody to do it. I don't know if there's one on file, but last year, I think I have the crops in it. We want to say something low or through the transit, fine. You have to take out corn, but would be, yeah, I would like to say that the town put their best foot forward and at least allowed it to be bid on. Who knows, might not get any bids.
Are there, would there be, last year there were a couple of crops that were identified, one of which was corn. Obviously, we've had conversations about the wild corn coming back and its use as a cover crop, et cetera. Is there still interest in that, or is there interest, again, as I mentioned, there was conversation specifically around hay, soybean, those types of crops that would still be great for keeping the structure, the integrity in the floodplain, but at the same time, maybe just have different, properties that would allow us to be able to, that'd be more amenable to us.
I wouldn't do hay because I don't think anybody's gonna bid on a 1-year hay field, and you're gonna be getting out of there like 3 times. If you said like soybeans or wheat or something that was stretched or combine, and they're in one kind of plant at the harvest.
And something with low chemicals.
again, you all are much more knowledgeable than I am. Because of the timeline, though, one of the things that that I've heard is that the soybean crop potentially could be a little bit later, which would allow for more time for the bidding process, but then also the drying aspect on it on the back end as well may extend that that option a little bit further out, past October into November, that timeline. Again, I think that's just something to consider as well, not just the type of crop, but where we're currently at in mid-March, getting it turned around, getting a bid, getting them to start tilling, or whatever process they need to have. Any thoughts?
I wrote out May 1st to November 1st, that's 7 months, that should be ample time to.
If it has to go a little past that, I don't see that would be a problem. If we got the money July 1st to build all the roads there, it still will take months to build all the roads. And if there is a road that's in that 12 acres, then it can be built last.
I would just,
Infrastructure.
yes, no, yes, sir. And I would say, currently as part of the master plan, there's not a road structure that would go through this area because it's a part of the floodplain in and of itself. But so, like I said, I've heard soybean May 1st and November 1st. Are other crops that you all would be open to having, or just soybean?
I defer to the expert.
I think I'll ask a real farmer tomorrow and get back to you. But I think there's a couple other things that we could do, like a week or something that it could be. It's still low.
I'm comfortable with us proceeding on that and you consulting with James on types of crops.
Here, here.
All right, thank you all.
Okay. At this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the regular portion of the town council meeting so that we can move into the business.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Hey, I would like to call to order the business meeting. Mills River Town Council. The agenda, and I don't believe we need to vote on the agenda for this, do we? So first we have discussion of nuisance and code enforcement.
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, if you haven't heard enough from Mr. Malachek in the regular meeting, we're excited to have him come back up here to talk during the business meeting around code enforcement and again, specifically around items such as the nuisance ordinance, et cetera, talking about what the department has been looking at, discussion for future.
Thank you all. So this is the first time we've brought a code enforcement discussion item to council. I just want to give you a brief background on kind of how we've gotten to where we are right now. Sorry, I should outline what we're going to go through. Going to give you some history and background. We talk about the code enforcement workflow process, talk through some positive and challenging cases, and then some additional code enforcement actions and resources that are available to staff. But again, I wanted to discuss with council and kind of set expectations before staff moves forward with those and some of our challenging cases.
Mr. Malachek,
Yes.
if I may, it may be also a good opportunity here to mention the cases that we're going to be discussing and the protections that we're taking.
That's correct, yes. So there will be some photos in this presentation of properties that have gone through code enforcement procedures with the town. Staff's made every effort to blur out any identifying information in those photos, and this presentation is not being shared online with the public. Everyone's looking at us through the camera, so this is just going to be in the background. But we tried our hardest to make sure there's no identifying information and tried to crop the photos so they weren't identifiable just from road frontage. So going into the history, the town has only had a nuisance ordinance a little while. So we adopted our first nuisance ordinance in early 2019. And from what I've heard, there was very limited code enforcement done from 2019 to 2021. Based on the historical records we've seen, there were notices of violation issued, there were code enforcement letters sent out, but after a couple letters, no further action was taken. And so due to that, there were a number of lingering cases that staff had to address when we had the capacity to. So code enforcement activities increased in 2021 when I was hired with the town, primarily addressing a backlog of those unaddressed cases and citizen complaints. And then due to my limitations on time, we hired the planning technician in 23, which increased staff capacity greatly to address code enforcement issues. Again, all complaint driven. For zoning enforcement for violations of our zoning ordinance, staff can go out and see if there's, an unpermitted development, and we can take action on that on our own. But for nuisance enforcement, again, outdoor storage of junk and debris, junk vehicles, it is only done on a complaint basis, submitted to the town. And so again, with the planning technician, one of their primary duties is code enforcement. So we're able to tackle that in a lot more of a timely manner now. And then we had our permit system come online in 23 as well. So now there's an option for folks to submit complaints anonymously through our online permit portal. And the SmartGov system not only has a permit management function, it has a code enforcement management function. That's where all our letters and basically case management is housed. So why do we have a nuisance ordinance? So again, it's derived from our police power to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the folks in Mills River. The primary objectives are to prevent injury and illness to folks on their property or on adjacent properties, to provide town-wide standards for abatement of nuisances and identify what those nuisances or prohibited actions or nuisances on a property may be, establish responsibility for any involved parties and a code enforcement process to get into compliance. And also to ensure proper actions may be taken to abate public nuisances. And we'll talk about what abating a public nuisance means a little later. So how do we do code enforcement? So again, nothing's done unless a complaint's received. So that could be a phone call. It could be someone coming in and filling out a paper form. It could be an email. Basically, as long as we get contact from a citizen, we will enter that into the code enforcement system and begin the process. Sometimes complaints are unfounded. So, or sometimes there's a complaint, but it might not be covered by a nuisance ordinance. So that's where staff goes out and investigates. And again, we'll work with, if they gave us their contact information, with the individual that may have submitted the complaint to explain whether that's covered or not. There are cases where we receive complaints and it's just not covered by our rules. And in that case, we have to inform the person that there's nothing we can enforce. If it does fall within our nuisance ordinance, we try to make contact gently first. We've since I've been here, we've implemented a door hanger system where we'll put a little door hanger either on someone's front door if it's accessible to us, or to their mailbox, just letting them know we were by, has our contact information, lets them know that there's an issue on their property they need to talk to us about. The first formal step is a first notice of violation. So that's a formal letter to the property owner notifying them there's an issue that needs to be corrected. After that, we would go out, do a compliance inspection, see if they've addressed those matters, and basically the process continues. So if there's no compliance, a second notice of violation is issued, another inspection happens, and then a final notice of violation. It's only at that third notice, the final notice, when fines come into play. Now, our goal is never to be punitive and fine folks unnecessarily. If we issue a first notice of violation and a property owner makes contact with us, even if they have extenuating circumstances, perhaps they're elderly or disabled, they need more time to clean up their property, whatever it may be, we will work with them on that as long as they're engaged with us. The fines really come into play for property owners who just don't respond, don't engage, or we will give them ample time to clean up and no action's been taken. So after fines are issued, again, the inspection and notice of violation process continues. So we'll go out and inspect. No progress has been made within that compliance period. There's the possibility of more fines or more enforcement action. The problem with the system to date is with some of our challenging cases where, for example, the property owners just never engaged with us whatsoever, we've accumulated fines, but have no other real recourse to move forward to address the matter. Now, there are things in the code we'll talk about that staff can do to address, basically take it to the next level of code enforcement, but that's why we wanted to talk to y'all tonight to kind of explain what's in the ordinance and set expectations for that going forward. So some positive cases, since we've been doing code enforcement, believe it or not, there are plenty of folks out there who didn't even know the town of Mills River had these rules, and are willing to work with us, but just need time. And again, as long as they're in contact with us and as long as they're showing some progress is made every inspection, we will work with them and give them time to clean up. There was an elderly gentleman, our planning technician Kevin Webb worked with for a year and a half, and again, he just needed time to clean up his property, and we were happy to do that. So here's one example. This was a complaint from October 21, junk vehicles and trash on the property. This property was issued fines because at the beginning there was no response or no engagement with our complaints. And then after a certain period of time, they did engage. And I think at one point, then there was no progress being made for a period of 4+ months. So we had to issue fines again to bring it to their attention and move forward. But here's just an example. I mean, I think this property maybe had 15 to 20 junked vehicles on it that were not operable. Some storage buildings that were filled with junk and debris. Cars being worked on up on blocks, and again, in a front yard across from folks, living in their home. So that's why we received that complaint. One of our prohibited nuisances is using campers or RVs to store solid waste. So in this case, there was a bunch of stuff packed in this camper that needed to be removed from the property. And again, although fines were issued and although it took years, the property is in a much better place right now. So you can see we have those yards completely clean. This is the back where actually that RV was with all those mattresses and other trash and debris on the ground. So again, we're willing to work with people to address those matters. So this was a great success to us. And some of the surrounding neighbors that submitted those complaints were very appreciative of staff's effort. Of course.
So with an outstanding fine like that, does the balance, does it continue to grow? Or is there a procedure for people to be able to make payments towards it without it growing? Once they're in compliance, the fine doesn't get any worse. Do we charge interest on that?
There's no continuing interest or compiling of it, if you will. I believe there is I'd have to check on the exact amount. I believe there's a 5% late fee.
Okay.
So if you don't pay it in a timely manner, that maybe that 5% penalty is tacked on, but that's it. And we'll talk about fines and potential, how that comes into play a little later. One thing I will say is that staff can issue fines, but we can't forgive them. Technically we're public servants. We're not law enforcement officers, but we're basically the land use law enforcement officers for the town. So when we issue a citation, it is considered a civil citation, just like any ticket. Those fines, and I'll do additional research on this, I believe can only be forgiven by this body, by council. Right now, as I've talked about with the UDO and our zoning enforcement or nuisance ordinance, there's a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity around the processes, around fine forgiveness, around fine collection. There's nothing even talked about in payment plans. So again, that would be something we'd look to firm up through the UDO process. So here was another example positive case. This was a complaint from March of 22. And you'll see a theme here. Often we're dealing with outdoor storage of junk and debris or junk vehicles on a property. This was one where no fines accumulated because the individual engaged with us immediately. And although the property is not completely clean to date, they've made significant progress. So this is a before picture. There were maybe 10+ junk vehicles on the property, plus a random assortment of outdoor storage of junk and debris. This is still a before picture, so there were items stored along an adjacent property line that other homes were looking at. Again, just things scattered around. Now, I don't have the perfectly clean picture, but this individual has sent us proof, basically, that items have been removed. So a car, this is a picture of a car being towed off, stuff, receipts for items taken to the dump. And again, here's a picture of that same field, again, not perfect, but in a better condition than it was before. So we still consider that a success, and we're still working with this property owner to get them into full compliance. Again, as long as someone is working with us, engaging with us, and showing us they're making progress over time, we will give them extensions in good faith. Last kind of positive case, this was from November 22. Again, junk vehicles and outdoor storage of junk and debris, no fines in this case. This one was next to a mobile home. Property owners did not want to engage in the beginning. This one actually, they were able to clean up the property a bit on their own, and then due to a change in ownership, the property was completely cleaned up by a new owner because staff made them aware there was a case on the property. Often, during a land transaction, a lawyer or attorney will reach out to the town asking if there's any enforcement action against the property. This was one where we were able to notify the new owner, and actually the new owner took action to clean up that property. So again, another successful case. Now some of our challenging cases. So this one, older complaint, actually from before I was even employed here, October 2019. Again, junk vehicles, significant outdoor storage, junk, trash, and debris. No fines paid, but there's fines owed of $2,200 in this situation. Smaller properties, so not as extensive as the outdoor storage and some of the previous examples. But this individual engaged with us off and on. There were, I think, 3 junk vehicles on the property. They had one of them removed and then never heard from them ever again. Sent letters, put door hangers out. I should say that when we send citations with fines, we do those via certified mail, similar to how we do for evidentiary hearings with the Board of Adjustment. So we know people have gotten the letter because they've signed for it with the USPS. But oftentimes they either, they're just not engaging with us. So in that situation, we've kind of come to a standstill because we have a property that's still not in compliance, is still in violation of our ordinances, but the property owner won't engage with us. We've fined them to a certain extent, and that's not done anything. And we're at a point now with that case, similar to some of these other examples, where we need to take it a step further. But again, those additional code enforcement actions are just something the town's not done before. This is a unique case too, and this one has a large amount of fines, and I will claim full responsibility for that. Because this was done when I was the sole code enforcement officer as zoning administrator with the town. So this was a complaint from August of 22, although I think we had some complaints from before that, primarily junk vehicles and outdoor storage of junk in the yard, and no engagement from this property owner whatsoever. I went and knocked on their door multiple times when I knew they were home, when there was a dog in the yard, put door hangers out, send certified mail slips where they've signed it and received it. No action, no engagement, nothing. Because I was the only code enforcement officer, or the only planning staff member at the time, I was overwhelmed with a lot of cases. And so this was one where I sent the violation letter and it sat for a while. Well, because the fines accrue at a rate of $50 a day over a couple of months, that added up to almost $8,500. And then after that, basically we stopped the fines and said it was possible the town would take legal action against them to remedy the issue. But to date, we've still received no engagement, no correspondence from them whatsoever. Just some examples of that property. At one time, I think they did, after our initial letter, move the junk vehicles to another part of the property, but still visible from the road, still visible to neighbors. And then this is the last one for a challenging example case from June of 23. This one fines owed are $2,700. And again, I'll just say this, we don't like to fine people. If they'll work with us, we don't want to fine people. We don't want to take that punitive approach. But it's the only tool in our box right now to get folks to engage with us. Because again, I'm responsible for enforcing our ordinances that are on the book. And I'll just say, if council has feels that some of these ordinances are not appropriate, then we need to have a discussion about updating the nuisance ordinance and changing what those prohibited nuisances are. But similar to how we talked about, if you have a floodplain ordinance, you have to enforce it. Our ethical obligation is to make sure we're enforcing this ordinance as well.
Mr. Malachek, if you can, just as a reminder for council and for those in the room, where do those fines go?
Oh, yeah. All of those fines, when collected, go to the school system. So specifically to the Henderson County school system, and that's general statute.
I believe that's just helpful because again,
Yes.
not wishing to fine, wanting to work with people. There's, the town of Mills River as an organization is not,
Yes.
gaining funds from these penalties. We are passing them on. Goal is to continue to work with people.
That's correct. Yeah, it has no effect on our budget, any of that. It goes into a special account that basically passes through to County Board of Education.
These fines were set by council, correct?
Yeah, so
Frequency, the frequency, $50 a day was set when the nuisance ordinance was passed. Is that correct?
yeah, it's in the ordinance language, and this is common in any local government, that the basic civil penalty amount is going to be $50 a day. And then the specific language that's usually included, and again, I see this everywhere, is every day is considered a separate finable offense. So we changed our procedures a little bit to make sure, like that one example, they don't rack up so quickly. So one thing we do now is we issue a notice of violation if they've not corresponded with us or engaged with us in the first two letters. On that third letter, that's when the fines kick in. So our new procedure is we issue one $50 fine with that letter. We wait the 2-week compliance period, wait for someone to get in touch with us. And then with that next letter, we accumulate the previous 2 weeks of fines versus with the case over $8,000 in fines. Again, that's when it was just me. I sent out a letter basically saying fines start and continue. And then they ran open-ended for a while.
So why did it end at 169 days?
Because it came to my attention and I thought it was excessive.
Okay, it's not like a rule that says, all right, we're gonna stop at.
No, I was able to come back to it, saw what had racked up and felt that was excessive and it needed to be halted. In terms of the amount of fines, now again, as we'll get into in the next couple of slides, there's additional action we can take beyond that. So here was just the last example property where, again, there's been limited engagement from the owner. And we're still trying to get them to clean up the property today. So what provisions or what items or things are we allowed to do with code enforcement? This has come up, just questions over the years is, our access to folks' properties. So we have the right, it's called, the legal term is curtilage, that basically if your property is not posted with a no trespassing sign, I am allowed to walk down the driveway and approach your front door just like a UPS driver, an Amazon driver, like someone delivering a package. Now, I'm not going to go around the front wall of the building because that's private space, but we are protected under North Carolina law to walk up to the main entrance of the building to try to make contact. Now, obviously, if the property is posted with no trespassing, we don't go past that point. One thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that this hasn't happened luckily, and I don't really want to get into this situation, but there is something called an administrative search warrant. That if there's a property owner that we've gotten a complaint about, and if the complaint is serious, that we feel it is a threat to public health, safety, and welfare, we do have the right, and actually the ordinance says we shall go to the court, get an administrative search warrant, and basically present it to the owner or post it on the property and do our search, limited to town nuisance. So no other no other laws would come into play there. We've never done this before, but again, I wanted to inform council that it's in the ordinance and it is something that the ordinance says we must do, again, if we feel it gets to that level.
And that's something that would be served by law enforcement.
By us.
You would have, but Okay, so if you have that search warrant, would you have law enforcement with you?
Most likely.
Okay.
Now, they wouldn't be allowed on the property, and anything they saw, they would not be admissible in a court of law because they don't have the search warrant. Us as the land use police do. But yes, for our safety, if we do go on properties where we believe there may be an issue, obviously we have a good relationship with the sheriff's department, and we'll have one of their folks basically parked at the end of the driveway, ensuring everything's okay.
Not to put you on the spot, but fines. Have there been a lot of people that have paid fines? Have there been, is it 20, 50 people? And here's what I'm getting at. $50 a day, that can build up pretty fast. And I realize it's up to them to engage with you. And when they engage, you all have the ability to say, okay, we're not going to add additional fines. But if for whatever reason they don't engage, and people aren't perfect, sometimes they may be afraid, whatever. But like with an $8,000 fine, that's pretty serious. I don't know that we'll ever see any of that $8,000. But for us as a board to say, you know what, let's forgive the $8,000. We also have a responsibility to the other people who have paid fines because they did the right thing. So part of me says, $8,000 fine is pretty serious. Maybe we could re-engage with this person and say, if you clean up your property, we'll forgive some of that fine. But we want to be careful and not do a disservice to the people who have paid the fines. Just like with taxes. If somebody's tax bill gets out of whack, we don't want to, a lot of people have paid their taxes. We can't really be unfair to the person that did. So does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say, and this is a guesstimate, but I would say maybe a fifth of
Just
the
a
cases we deal with have fines involved. So maybe 20% of the cases we deal with even have fines involved. Because again, most folks are like, oh, I didn't know that was the case. I'm sorry. Just give me some time to address this and we'll work with them. Out of the folks that are fined, maybe that 20% of cases, maybe a third pay. Again, it's a tool to get folks to engage with us, and it's not even that we want to issue the fines, and I hate to say it this way, it's the threat that the fines could come if you don't engage with us and address.
Well, it is an ordinance. It's a law.
Correct.
You live in a town, the town has laws.
Does that answer your question?
It does.
So now we're going to get into some of the more in-depth enforcement options. So civil penalties, just since we covered fines, that's a shall, a must in the ordinance. So any violator shall be subject to a civil penalty of $50. Each day's violation is a separate offense. And again, almost every nuisance enforcement ordinance I've seen has that exact language. That's fairly common in the state. Now, these next two I want to dig into a little further because although the ordinance in some cases say we shall or must do these actions, the town's never done this before. The town's, nuisance enforcement in the town has only been around, 5 years. And just in the last 3, since we've had the staff capacity, have we actually been really enforcing it and being comprehensive in addressing these issues, again, from citizen complaints. In the case of the $8,000 plus fine example, and this one says may, for civil action, the town may take appropriate action to enforce this chapter, including injunctive relief, compel performance, or other appropriate action in the court of law, basically. So this is basically what happens is we would work with the town attorney to basically ask for an injunction or an order of abatement from the court. So then that person, if this went through, would basically be served with a legal court order, not just us on Mills River letterhead, but an order from a judge, saying you're in violation of this local law and you must abate these nuisances and possibly give a time frame to do it. It's through this that there's a possibility fines could be forgiven. But again, that would be through settlement and a civil action in a court of law. But that's one thing I'll come back to, in a moment. The other action we can take is to actually abate the nuisances at the town's expense. And this is a shall or must. So it says the town shall make every reasonable effort to, if required to remove or abate the nuisance, the town shall make every reasonable effort to recover the costs. Councilman Cantrell brought up our nuisance abatement line item in last year's budget. So basically, we have a set amount of funds every year, and I believe this was in place before I was even in place here. Basically, to do this work, taxpayer dollars dedicated to this line item. That if there's an absent property owner, if there's someone that's just not engaging with us. Now, there's specific protections for those private property owners through this process, but basically the town would go onto their property. There'd be civil, legal items filed in the court of law as well. And basically we would hire a contractor to remove those junk vehicles, to clean up junk and debris, dispose of it. And then the part that's a shall or a must is that because those are public dollars, taxpayer money, we have to make every reasonable effort to recover that, and it's usually by placing a lien on the property. And these are really the two things I wanted some feedback on, because again, abatement in some parts of the ordinance, it's a may, in other parts it's a shall, but if we do nuisance abatement, we have to recover the cost or make every reasonable effort to. So really, I'm opening this up for feedback and discussion, and again, just setting expectations forward, because again, knowing this is newer in the town of Mills River, we don't want to go out and start filing court cases against residents to clean up their property without council being aware of that. But I also wanted to educate y'all of what's in the ordinance, because that's also what we're down.
Were those the top 3 fines, basically, the 2,000, the 8,500, if you were to, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. If you were to list people that have outstanding fines, basically, $8,500, $8,400, that's the top, right?
Yes. By a
And then
long
the
shot.
next one down is about 2,000,
Correct.
and then below that. So,
And there's some that it's just $50, and
Sure.
we're still waiting on payment for just that $50.
just for $50. The thing, what I'm sitting up here thinking about is $50 a day, and I realize engaging with you stops the fines. You're right. You are able to make that decision to stop fining if people are working towards it.
That's our interpretation currently.
That's your
It's
interpretation.
not laid out in the code, but correct.
And maybe that's something we should address and give you that judgment where you can exercise it, right? Because if for whatever reason that fine grows and it keeps growing, and 180 days later you're at $8,400, maybe at some point before we get that high, we need to look at the civil action. We need to reach out and get some additional help from the courts, and not let it grow that high. Because what I could see happening is that it's a $50 fine, it's a $100 fine. Well, I can't pay that. It's a $150 fine. I can't get to that before long. It's something you can never pay. And then when we're at a point where the town comes in and cleans the property up, how are we going to get that money back? If we set it up, if we can say, well, maybe $50 a day is too much. Maybe we should change that to $50 a week. Now, if it's a life safety issue, you've got a dripping fuel tank, right? This dripping fuel, if you've got something that appears to be hazardous waste or something, that's one thing, that's life safety. But, if it's rats and vermin, if you don't mow your lawn, you end up with rats and vermin. Is that really is that the life safety issue? If it's, I don't know, I'm rambling, but I would like to see a mechanism before it gets to the exorbitant stage. We take some action to get someone's attention, because that's really what it is. We need to get their attention. We need to bring it into compliance.
And if I may, Mayor Pro Tem Moore, that I would caution council a little bit on on what is a public health and safety element, because again, that does go into interpretation. But, and I'll look at Mr. Malachek here to correct me on this. First, the language about the $50 each day is rather common around the state. But whether or not there's a cap onto when that then triggers the next step. So for instance, let's just say I'm going to make this up, but it's $50 a day. And then at the time it hits, $5,000, right? Which would be 100 days, right? Then at that point, that's when it would automatically potentially trigger the civil action or whatever those steps are, because then you're taking the arbitrary nature out of it and you're just saying, hey, we've gone through these steps. We no longer believe we're gonna, this threshold is, or this action is no longer helping. We need to now escalate it and it's hit that threshold. I don't know if there are issues with that, but just something to consider. And Mr. Malachek, anything to add to that?
There's no issues with that. I mean, again, this is all new for Mills River. I recognize that. And so, I mean, that's why I want to be here having this discussion, because everything we've done is just based off my interpretation of what's in the code, and it's limited what's in there. So yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I'm just remembering, I do need to clarify with the UDO consultant if nuisance enforcement's part of the UDO, because I believe zoning enforcement is, but I think nuisance might be separate. So I'll confirm that, and then if it is something council wants to look into amending, we can always do this through an ordinance amendment, and it wouldn't trigger down zoning.
Sure. Well, I would like for us to consider, is $50 a day just too much? And then if it were, say, $50 a week, or, even 50, we're not out to find people. We're out to make sure that the existing ordinance is followed. So if we didn't make those fines grow so quickly, but still at 90 days, let's say it was $50 a week, and at 90 days or however many weeks goes into something close to 84 days or something like that, then we go to court and we get the civil action. So their fine is not something they can't pay necessarily, but we still get the required results by, okay, now we're going to do the civil action and show up, and you're served, and now you're on notice that it's gotten serious. Because I know it'd be hard for me to pay $8,400 fine to get back into compliance. And even if I get into compliance, I've still got the $8,400 fine to pay. I don't know. Is that?
I think going back to Matt's point, I think it's setting the limits on when the next action starts is probably the most critical thing.
Yeah.
Because I think the $50 a day comes from if I'm in violation and I know I'm in violation, but I'm making profit off the violation, I may make more than $50 a day. So paying $50 a day is nothing to me.
Sure.
So that's the argument that can be used. So I think it's the caps of where we start the next process that's probably what's going to trigger that.
And I think maybe a time limit would be a reasonable time limit that get people to come into compliance or at least respond to you. And then maybe we should codify, however you pronounce the word, so that once they are interacting with you, you are legally able to stop that fine. Because the way I read this, you can't stop the fine until it's brought into compliance. You can't stop it. But I want to give you that ability to say, okay, we're going to pause the fines. You still owe us $150 because it's been 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever. And if the cleanup stops, then we're going to have to restart the fines.
So let me ask a point blank question. Is council for these Mays, is council comfortable with staff moving forward with civil action or abatement on some of these example properties, or would you like to see the ordinance updated before that?
And just for clarification, on some of the examples, or at least the one with the highest monetary value currently, that one is still not in compliance.
Correct.
It was just stopped with the fines after 180 days or approximately 176 days. That technically would have still continued to accrue over time. It is not as if it has met compliance yet, which again started in October 2022, I believe.
Yeah, and that's the
So-
dilemma is after we rack up all these fines, we've got no other options left for staff.
In a while. Just grab. That first week. You could get them that,
That's how I envision code enforcement in Mills River. Again, we're not out to be punitive. We want to educate folks that this exists and work with them to address the issue that may be affecting their neighbors.
I will highlight that two different times where above and beyond to let people have time. They did get cleaned up. Do that. I think
We're very fortunate to have you.
So you're looking for direction on action.
Well, so what? A little bit. I mean, again, the ordinance says may. We've never done this before in the town, so I'm just sensitive to the fact that moving forward with a civil action is new. And so I just didn't want there to be any surprises.
Do you get, so when you send the registered letter, the people accept the letter, do you get the return that they've accepted the letter?
Yeah, I've gotten it with their signature on it.
Okay.
Mhm.
And off the top of your head, what's the largest fine that's been paid to date?
$1,200.
Okay. Perfect. I mean, I'm thinking of a way to fix the issue. If we can fix it. I agree. I think that I would be in favor of the civil action once it gets to a certain point. And I think that we as council should determine what that point is, whether it's days or dollars. And I think we should also empower you to legally stop the fine when someone's working with you and then reinstate it and do that administratively and not have to come before council. And I do think that we as council, if we have the power to forgive a portion of a fine and we feel that that person is going into it, you know, in good faith, we can't really forgive the whole fine when it's $8,500 or $2,000. But if we set a level, you know, still they pay a fine, but they have to bring it into compliance or we're going to court. If we go to court, we really lose a whole lot of bargaining ability if we go to court because it racks up costs for the town to take someone to court. Sometimes that piece of paper that's served gets people's attention. I can tell you that story. If it wasn't 9 o'clock, I might be tempted to. But
And we're really trying to be good stewards with the taxpayer dollars as well. Because again, I remember
wasn't me.
specifically this line item on nuisance abatement was called out in the last budget process. And again, we want to show we're using those funds towards this. But again, before we take that first step, just want to check in on it. We kind of covered all this already. So nuisance abatement is using town funds to address the issues on a property. We would recover the cost through a lien or through civil action. Funds are in the departmental budget. Went through these. Here's one I want to highlight. So North Carolina League of Municipalities has something called the North Carolina Local Government Debt Set-Off Clearinghouse Program. Almost all the municipalities in Henderson County actually participate in this, and basically it assists local governments with collection of delinquent debts by offsetting tax returns, lottery winnings, etc. Here's some basic stipulations for that. Now, if we wanted to participate in this program, we would have to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the league, and that'd have to be approved by council. And you have to complete an annual participation form. But is this something council would be interested in staff looking into further in terms of cost, as a cost recovery mechanism?
I think so. I think so. I think that's very reasonable. And I also think back to the, going with that first step of the civil,
Mhm.
I think if we set, a threshold of $2,000, when your fine hits $2,000, we're gonna go to court. And then, we could go back and address this property with the large fine and say, okay, well, $2,000 is our cutoff. We'll take your fine down to $2,000. Then we're going to take you to court because it has gone on for so long. I'm sorry, I'm getting my head wrapped around that one property. You know, how can we find some sort of a win solution there? You know,
And if it
I
pleases,
know I'm trying to solve one problem. Go ahead.
and if it pleases council, I think maybe an appropriate step, for council to provide for us is to, allow us the chance to go back, look at other municipalities and what thresholds they may use, whether it's days, whether it's values, what other types of, mechanisms may exist, and then bring those options before council for consideration. Just so then that way, we can see what may be an appropriate, potential threshold to react to.
I think that's good. And to people listening, we're not out to get your money. We're just out to follow our law, our ordinance, and just talking, just being a participant in this will help. Don't just let it go.
That's really all I have at this point. I mean, Kevin and I have talked about educating the public more, making flyers, having a code enforcement webpage, just letting folks know, what prohibited nuisances are, what not to have on their property. But I don't need to belabor it anymore. I think we got the feedback we needed, and we'll come to y'all with some further clarification on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Next, discussion and direction concerning nonprofits policy adopted in 2007.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm going to let Mike, Mr. Malachek get back to his desk over in the back because he's, he is doing yeoman's work today with in both locations. But this came up as a part of the budgetary retreat last Thursday. There was a conversation about nonprofits and the role of of nonprofits when it comes to the budgetary process. And one of the things, thank you, sir. And actually, if I may, Patty, if you may hand those out to them just so that they have a copy of it in front of them as well. I apologize, it's not in your packet. This was a last minute addition for consideration. But during the budgetary retreat, there was a question about our nonprofits policy. And we do have a nonprofits policy that was adopted in 2007. And among those other elements, again, I'm just going to quickly just go over it. Eligible organizations are serving Mills River are identified as 501(c)(3) with a 501(c)(3) designation. And they come together regularly for promoting, providing, or supporting services. They must be located within the Mills River corporate limits, or it must be described in one or more of the following: located in Mills River corporate limits for its primary service, has an office in Mills River, has a majority of Mills River residents in its service population, conducts majority of its activities or programs in Mills River, or as a regional organization which focuses on a significant program in Mills River, but may conduct their operations outside. The other question was around funding, and I'll just, again, it's in your packet, but item 2, organizations may apply to Town of Mills River for operating funding assistance, specific program cost, or for capital items needed for successful execution of their mission. The funding amount, there was a conversation during the budget retreat. The policy, though, states that it's be determined during the annual budgeting process. And requests received during the budget process will be given priority consideration. I'm going to skip over a little bit, but I'm happy to go over any elements that I did skip. There is an application process that is identified as well through our policy, that those completed applications come to staff. Essentially, staff reviews them, and then we provide them to council as a part of the budgetary process, as a part of, as a recommendation. And then we have the right as a staff to also ask, for annual reporting, additional documentation that's necessary to make sure that they're following through on what they've put forward. But ultimately, the funding decision is council, the part of the budgetary process. And, at the time, you all are able to reserve the right to deny a request for any reason. And it's spelled out within the policy. Now, I will say that, this again is the policy from 2007. And I will just say it as still your new town manager, I was thankful that you all requested to see this policy because it has not run across my desk. But there are a couple other elements that I think are vitally important for discussion here, that I think may also create potential conflicts with, between North Carolina law and our current policy, as well as our application process. So what you see on your screen here is from the Essentials of Municipal Government. This was actually provided to council, to our two new council members on the board this year in January, where they talk through specifically our authority and our ability to make certain decisions based off of that authority. So I'll specifically turn your attention to, and here we go. Again, on the slide deck in front of you here, local government and public authority must have statutory authority to undertake any type of activity, right? So those could be under general laws, local acts, or chartered provisions, right? If you look at the next page, you see that really what that means is we're looking at being able to do work on the public, from a public purpose, right? So on slide 7 in your handout, you'll see the power of taxation shall be exercised for public purposes only. So you must have statutory authority to expend funds. They must be spent for the benefit of the citizens within your local government, and they must be spent for citizens generally and not solely to benefit private individuals and entities. So again, so far, so good, right? The next slide that you see underneath, also kind of slide 8, talks about the cross between county municipalities and states. And I think that's a great little example of what municipalities may be able to work on. But this is where I think the conversation comes before council to provide guidance for us as staff, is around nonprofit support. Again, this is from the School of Government. At the top of the page there, it says, in general, a local government does not have statutory authority to support a nonprofit's community organization or other private entities, general operating or capital expenditure. Unless within certain parameters, as you can see on the next page, there are exceptions on slide 10. And it has to be around a nonprofit rescue squad, nonprofit volunteer fire department, museum and art nonprofit, nonprofit animal shelter, nonprofit hospital, private entities providing certain physical, intellectual, or other developmental disability services, or historical or preservation organizations. Now, the one element that you will see that's highlighted in yellow on the top there is that a local government is authorized to provide, again, for services that they are that they have the authority to engage in, and around community development, specifically programs concerned with employment, economic development, crime prevention, child care, health, drug abuse, education, and welfare needs of persons of low and moderate income. So I've had conversations both with the School of Government as well as with our town attorney. And really what my understanding is, as of right now, that if it does not fall, if a nonprofit does not fall within one of those exceptions, there must be a purpose purpose, program, initiative, etc., that meets all the criteria about working for, helping local government, the local government in which it serves, but also assisting and aiding with a population and the welfare of low and medium income, moderate income individuals. So that's where, again, we're trying to draw that line. So that was been very clear to me that general operating questions, general capital questions, or statements are not something that we as a local government are able to provide. So our current current application, clearly states, are you using this for operating expenditures or capital expenditure? It is my interpretation, at least so far, again, in coordination with the town attorney and the school of government, that we need to potentially modify that to also state specifically what those operating or capital expenditures are being used for, so that we can ensure that we're meeting the intent, which is we have the public purpose in mind, and that it's aiding within one of those types of demographic pieces that are before you. So I'm gonna pause there. I talked through it quickly. It's probably because it's 9:25, and I apologize. But I threw a lot of information out. I just want to answer any questions that I can and get guidance. The last thing I will state is providing this guidance now was incredibly helpful for us because, as you know, since we have kicked off the budgetary process, nonprofit requests tend to come in between March into April, and then for council's discussion, late April. So we're in kind of a time crunch for getting guidance on how best to move forward. Oh, and I apologize. The last thing here actually is talking about support versus partnerships. We are able to enter into partnerships, therefore contractual agreements, not just supporting a nonprofit, but a contractual agreement around an activity service project that the local government, again, town of Mills River, has the actual authority to engage in. So that is one element that we can say, hey, instead of here are funds, we can say, let's go into a partnership agreement with a nonprofit, and we would have the statutory authority to do something, but instead we are working through this nonprofit to meet that need. That is something that's considered.
Discussion, a lot to think about.
So can I give you a for example?
You may give me any examples you'd like, sir.
So, a contractual agreement, partnership, if they're engaged in what could be considered parks or recreation type activities.
Yes, yes, sir.
That
So
would
yeah,
count.
we have the statutory authority to handle parks and recreation. Yes.
Okay.
And another example, for instance, if we are working with say, Meals on Wheels, a really good organization, we can't buy them a van. We can't buy them gas. We can buy food. We can help their program to buy the food to give out. They have to come and tell us, they have to show us, be accountable, that the money we give them is not going in capital expenditures, as in the van, not going into gasoline as operating expenditures, but into the actual program itself. Is that kind of the mindset behind it?
I would say that, and again, not an attorney, I'm happy to bring the town attorney in on this as well. But again, from my discussions, the request couldn't be from a nonprofit to say, help us with a capital expense.
Help us to build a playground, help us to buy a van, help us to.
But if there's a program or an initiative or some type of, specifically a program that therefore a capital or operating expenditure could be clearly delegated to that program, that would be something that we could consider. Again, as long as it's within our statutory authority.
And that would include serving underprivileged or.
Exactly. That actually goes, like I said, specifically programs, that would fall specifically within that community development programming option.
Like if you partnered with a SNAP EBT thing, that would qualify.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes, my interpretation, that is absolutely clearly fits within that, because it's helping to serve a program that for low and moderate income individuals, and to serve that specifically in the town of Mills River.
I mean, I do think if we're going against state law, we need to correct that.
I would say it's not necessarily that we're going against it. What I'm saying is
Right.
that our current application, in my opinion, is too ambiguous around that, which could create potential conflicts. And so my request would be guidance from council to update our application process to make sure that we're staying within compliance before releasing it.
Fair enough, I agree.
And
think we've got a consensus.
I think, yeah,
And
and it may not be a fair discussion right now with Shannon not here, but I personally would like to see the nonprofits, all the ABC funds go to the nonprofits. I know we've got that for farmland preservation, but we can change that to us. If we need more money in that, then we have the will to add more money at any point in time. But if we, I have a real heartburn about taxing citizens to raise money to give to a nonprofit when they may not agree with that cause. That's a personal belief, but that's,
well, as a citizen who is definitely a nonprofit, I would agree. I think that, you know, I think, we've got that income from ABC, which definitely could be used for that. And then we support as a town, the farmland preservation. So I think that's makes sense. I agree. That's something we would have to change, if not this year, through the budget process. We allocate that money and say, was it 70-something thousand dollars comes through the ABC, if I remember correctly. I don't remember how much that was made up.
I think it's about 30 to 40,000.
Sure. We may want to support farmland preservation with more money than that. And then, anyway,
This year, say like, hey.
agree. I agree.
So just for my purposes, then again, for budgeting, is there a consensus from council to do a few items? One, ensure updating the application. And two, looking back, well, I would say it would be a little bit difficult this year because our ABC funds have been put into farmland or into land preservation, right? So moving forward, though, there would be going into next year the potential of those funds coming in. But again, we won't know what that is. It would be right now. We would be making decisions on the FY26 budget on nonprofit requests with a projection of what the ABC sales tax is. Whereas technically, we could make the argument that you could base the decision on what the actuals were from the previous year, right? Whereas like, you have 36. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I just want to make sure before I start going down this route that I have direction from you all. Use the number that we currently have this year for that as the baseline. Set that, and then we'll have that direction moving forward. Is that correct? You're more than welcome to use my mic if you'd like.
Thank you. And do we have any additional items for next meeting? Future agenda items. All right, then. Love. Have a motion second. All in favor?